The harbor looks beautiful at night, lights reflecting off the water, restaurants full, tourists everywhere. From here, Baltimore looks like it made it, like it survived, but drive 10 minutes away, and the story changes completely. Abandoned homes, empty streets, entire blocks missing life. Not destroyed overnight. No single event. No dramatic collapse. Just left behind. This isn't a story about collapse. It's a story about a city that slowly, almost invisibly, lost its purpose. The city that moved America. There was a time when Baltimore wasn't struggling. It was essential, not just important, necessary. A deep water port in the perfect location between the American South and the industrial North. If goods were moving, Baltimore was involved. Coal, steel, sugar, grain. Railroads connected the port to the interior. Factories processed raw materials. Shipyards built at massive scale. Baltimore didn't just participate in the economy. It was infrastructure. It connected supply chains. It reduced costs. It made movement predictable. Without cities like Baltimore, the American economy doesn't scale the way it did. It made the system reliable, and reliability is what allows growth to compound. And it made a simple promise. Show up, and you could build a life. No degree, no connections, just consistency. And for decades, that promise worked. A system that felt permanent. This wasn't fragile growth. It was a system. Bethlehem Steel Sparrow's Point plant alone employed over 30,000 workers. One place, 30,000 people. Entire neighborhoods existed because of it. Morning shifts, factory whistles, generations working in the same jobs, all tied to the same economic engine. These weren't temporary roles. They were stable, middle-class careers. Paychecks, pensions, predictable lives. You could plan around them. Buy a house, raise a family, retire with stability. And that's what made it dangerous. Because systems that feel permanent usually aren't. The change that didn't look like change. Baltimore didn't collapse. It drifted. At first, the changes were small. A slowdown here, a layoff there, a shift removed. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that felt like the end. Until it added up. Then came containerization. Instead of loading cargo piece by piece, it moved in uniform boxes. Stacked, lifted, transferred. What once required hundreds of workers could now be done by a few machines. Same goods, completely different workforce. And once that shift happened, there was no going back. Because this wasn't a temporary change. It was a permanent leap in efficiency. Ports became faster, cheaper, more scalable, and cities built around labor were forced to operate with far less of it. When the core breaks, at the same time, steel was under pressure. Production moved overseas. Costs dropped elsewhere. Competition increased. Sparrow's Point didn't collapse overnight. It declined, slowly, year after year, until it was gone. And when a city loses its core industry, it doesn't just lose jobs. It loses stability. A worker loses income. The city loses a taxpayer. A business loses customers. A school loses funding. Multiply that thousands of times, and the system starts to fail. Not all at once, but gradually, a little worse each year, until the damage becomes impossible to ignore. A city that split, but decline doesn't spread evenly. And in Baltimore, it followed lines that already existed. For decades, federal housing policy and redlining had divided the city by design. Not by accident, by design. Some neighborhoods had access to credit, mortgages, mobility. Others were locked out, legally systematically. So when the economy shifted, those with options left, moved to the suburbs, took their income, took their tax dollars. Those without options stayed. And that's how decline becomes concentrated, not spread across a city, but trapped in the same neighborhoods, across the same streets, generation after generation. But not everyone had somewhere else to go. And when people can't leave, the neighborhood absorbs everything. The job loss, the disinvestment, the neglect, the vacuum. When stable systems disappear, something replaces them. Not because it's better, but because something always fills the gap. By the 80s and 90s, Baltimore wasn't just losing jobs. It was losing structure, routine, predictability, opportunity. Row houses emptied. Corners went quiet. Entire blocks lost their rhythm. Empty buildings, disconnected communities. And into that vacuum came alternative systems of survival. Not as a cause, but as a consequence. Not a choice, but an adaptation. The illusion of recovery. Then came what looked like a comeback. The Inner Harbor redevelopment brought tourists, hotels, investment. And it worked for that area, but it didn't spread because the underlying problem was never addressed. Baltimore was built for nearly 1 million people. Today, far fewer remain. Same infrastructure, same costs. A shrinking tax base trying to maintain a city built for twice the population. That gap doesn't close with a waterfront. Why it still hasn't recovered. Baltimore didn't stop evolving. New sectors grew. Healthcare, education, research. Institutions like Johns Hopkins became major employers. But this economy works differently. It's more specialized. It requires skills, degrees, access. It doesn't replace industrial jobs at scale. It doesn't rebuild entire communities. So the city continues, but unevenly. Growth in some areas, stagnation in others. Not collapse, not recovery. Something in between. What's left? Baltimore still functions. The harbor still moves. The skyline still stands. But the system that once held the city together never came back. And that reveals something uncomfortable. Cities don't always collapse. Sometimes they keep going without ever recovering. If you want more stories about the cities, economies, and systems that shape the world, like and subscribe. The next one might already be happening.